The medication cart hit the wall with a sound like thunder in a quiet chapel. Pills scattered across the polished linoleum of St. Mary's Hospital's third-floor corridor. Antibiotics rolled under equipment. Painkillers skittered into corners. A bottle of insulin shattered glass fragments, catching the fluorescent light like broken promises. Alexandra Kane stood frozen, her hands trembling as she stared at the wreckage she'd created. Her dirty blonde hair was pulled back in a deliberately messy ponytail, loose strands framing a face that most people forgot the
Doctor, the
moment they
patient's
stopped
condition
looking
is
at it.
deteriorating
The thin
rapidly.
3-centimeter
What are the latest
scar
vitals?
above her left
BP is
eyebrow
dropping. We need to
was
go now.
partially hidden by those strands. Most people never noticed it. Those who did assumed a childhood accident, a fall from a bike perhaps. Nothing interesting. They were wrong. Her medium blue scrubs hung loose on her 5'4" frame, deliberately oversized. 2 sizes too big. The fabric concealed what lay beneath a compact athletic physique that could run 5 miles without breaking stride, could hold a firing stance for 20 minutes, without tremor, could perform emergency surgery in a sandstorm while mortars screamed overhead. But no one at St. Mary's knew that. No one was supposed to know. Are you kidding me right now? The voice cut through the hallway like a scalpel through skin. Cold, precise, designed to draw blood. Doctor. Vincent Harlow stood at the end of the corridor, backlit by the windows overlooking Los Angeles. At 6'2", with silver-threaded hair that caught the late afternoon sun and a jawline that belonged on magazine covers, he looked like Central Casting's idea of a chief of surgery, which conveniently was exactly what he was. Behind him trailed 6 residents, young, eager, dressed in pristine white coats that had never seen real blood. They moved like ducklings, following their mother, mimicking his posture, his stride, even the way he held his tablet. Harlow's footsteps echoed as he approached, each step a judgment, each sound a reminder of hierarchy. Kane. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to intimidate, far enough to maintain plausible deniability if anyone accused him of aggression. That's the 3rd cart you've wrecked this month. Alexandra kept her eyes fixed on the floor tiles. White with gray flecks. Cleaned every morning at 6. She'd memorized the pattern months ago. When you spent enough time looking down, you learned every detail of the ground. I'm sorry, Dr. Harlow. Her voice came out soft, barely above a whisper, the voice of someone who'd learned to make herself small. The wheel caught on something. I'll clean it up immediately. The wheel caught on something. Harlow turned to his residents, eyebrows raised in theatrical disbelief, a performer playing to his audience. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when hospitals lower their standards. This woman has been here for 8 months and still can't handle basic tasks. He stepped closer. Alexandra's shoulders hunched forward instinctively, a physical manifestation of submission, making her small frame appear even smaller. Every muscle in her body screamed to straighten, to square her shoulders, to look him in the eye, and tell him exactly what she thought of his pompous bedside manner and his magazine-cover jawline shine. She didn't. Colonel Alexandra Kane had spent 15 years learning to control her body under circumstances that would make Dr. Vincent Harlow soil his pristine white coat. Pretending to be weak was child's play compared to performing emergency thoracotomy while enemy fire pinged off the medical tent's metal framework. Do you have any idea how much those medications cost? Harlow continued, his voice carried down the corridor. Making sure everyone heard, making sure everyone knew who held power here. That's coming out of the department budget. My department. Yes, sir, I understand. Alexandra dropped to her knees and began collecting the scattered pills. Her hands shook visibly as she reached for the containers, a performance she'd perfected over 8 months of hiding in plain sight. But beneath that trembling exterior, her mind worked with mechanical precision. 2 residents, 3 nurses at the station 20 meters away, 1 orderly pushing a gurney. Security camera at 11 o'clock mounted above the East Corridor junction. Fire exit 20 meters to her right. Stairwell access 40 meters behind Harlow's position. Her hands continued to shake. Her eyes continued to catalog. What Dr. Harlow didn't notice, what no one ever noticed, was the way Alexandra's trembling hands never dropped a single pill. Despite their apparent instability, each movement was controlled, efficient, the hands of a surgeon who'd operated in conditions that would paralyze most doctors with fear. He didn't notice the precise surgical scars on the backs of her hands, small, faded. The marks left by a shrapnel extraction performed in a field hospital outside Kandahar province. Emergency surgery on herself because there was no one else available and the convoy wouldn't wait. He didn't notice the 5-centimeter vertical scar on her right forearm, usually hidden by her sleeve, the result of a knife fight in a corridor much like this one, but drenched in blood and lit by muzzle flashes instead of fluorescent tubes. And he certainly didn't notice that beneath her hunched posture, Alexandra's center of gravity remained perfectly balanced. Weight distributed, muscles coiled, ready to move in any direction at any moment, ready to fight, ready to kill if necessary. But not today. Today she was just Lexi Kane, incompetent floor nurse, the woman everyone overlooked. Just get it cleaned up, Harlow said dismissively. He turned to his residents. Let's continue rounds. We have actual important work to do. As the group walked away, one of the younger residents, a man named Dr. Bradford, nephew of someone important fresh from medical school and still possessing the dangerous combination of idealism and ignorance, spoke quietly. Dr. Harlow, that seemed a bit harsh. She's clearly trying her best. Harlow's laugh was sharp, cutting. Her best isn't good enough, Bradford. Honestly, I don't know who she knows on the board to still have a job here. The woman can barely function. I've seen more competent nursing students. The group's laughter faded as they rounded the corner. Alexandra continued collecting pills, her movements methodical, deliberate, each container placed in the cart with surgical precision despite her supposedly trembling hands. Footsteps approached from behind. Don't let him get to you, honey. Rebecca Thornton knelt beside Alexandra, her knees protesting the movement. At 55, with 20 years at St. Mary's under her belt, Rebecca was the kind of nurse who'd seen everything, survived everything, and still showed up every day with compassion intact. Her heavy-set frame and kind eyes made her the mother figure of the third floor. She picked up a bottle of antibiotics and handed it to Alexandra. Drake's always been an ass. Brilliant surgeon, terrible human being. It's okay, Alexandra said quietly, not meeting Rebecca's eyes. He's right, I should be more careful. You're too hard on yourself. Rebecca squeezed Alexandra's shoulder. But between you and me, you might want to request a transfer to another floor. Harlow's been making noises about getting you removed from surgical. I understand, thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca stood, her knees cracking like gunfire. She walked back toward the nurse's station, leaving Alexandra alone with her scattered medications and carefully maintained facade. Alexandra remained on her knees, collecting the last of the pills, but her gray-blue eyes, which had seemed so timid moments ago, were now sharp, calculating, sweeping the corridor with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years assessing threats in hostile territory. 15 years. 15 years since she'd worn the uniform with her real name stitched above the pocket. 15 years since Colonel Alexandra Elizabeth Kane, M.D., had commanded field surgical teams in places whose names were still classified in Pentagon briefing documents. 15 years since the IED that had killed 4 of her team and left her with burns across her left torso, shrapnel wounds in her hands and forearms, and a medical retirement that came with a chest full of medals she kept in a storage unit on the other side of Los Angeles. Medals she never looked at, couldn't look at, because every piece of polished metal represented someone she'd failed to save. She pushed the now restocked medication cart back toward the supply room, logged the damaged medications in the system, noted the incident in her personnel file, the third such incident this month, as Harlow had so kindly pointed out. All carefully planned, all deliberately executed, because incompetent people made mistakes, and mistakes were expected, and expected behavior was invisible. And invisible was exactly what Alexandra needed to be. The wall clock showed 1847 hours, 13 minutes until shift change. Then she could go home to her small apartment in Silver Lake, to the silence, to the photographs she kept face down in drawers, because looking at them meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling, and feeling meant the carefully constructed walls might crack. Lexi, Rebecca's voice carried from the nurse's station, urgent but controlled, the tone that meant something was happening, something serious. Alexandra's hands, which had been trembling while she typed her incident report, became absolutely still for a microsecond, then resumed their shaking as she turned. Yes, we just got an emergency admit coming up from the ER. Gunshot wound to the abdomen. They need all hands for trauma prep. Every muscle in Alexandra's body went rigid. GSW abdomen. Memories flickered. Muzzle flash, blood on sand, Rodriguez screaming. Martinez trying to hold his intestines inside his body cavity with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She forced the memories down, locked them behind the walls she'd built, walls 15 years thick. Is Dr. Harlow handling it? Her voice stayed soft, timid. He's already in OR too. Rebecca lowered her voice. Dr. Mercer is taking this one. She specifically asked for experienced trauma nurses. Rebecca's eyes held something Alexandra had seen before. a kind of knowing. A suspicion that the incompetent floor nurse might be more than she appeared. "I'm putting you on it," Rebecca continued. "Don't make me look bad." "Okay." Dr. Elena Mercer, chief of trauma, former Army major, Gulf War veteran, one of the few people at St. Mary's who sometimes looked at Alexandra with eyes that saw past the trembling hands and hunched shoulders, who occasionally seemed to recognize something familiar in the way Alexandra moved, the way she assessed, the way her eyes cataloged exits and threats with military precision. Dangerous, but unavoidable. "I'll do my best," Alexandra said. She followed Rebecca to Trauma Bay 3, where organized chaos was already unfolding. The air smelled of antiseptic and blood. Monitors beeped. Staff moved with practiced efficiency. The familiar symphony of emergency medicine, a sound that made Alexandra's heart rate slow instead of spike. This was where she belonged, even if no one knew it. The patient was being wheeled in, a young man, early 20s, white, blonde hair matted with sweat and blood. His shirt had been cut away to expose the entry wound in his lower abdomen. The flesh around it was angry red, already swelling. Blood seeped steadily, but not catastrophically. Through and through, Alexandra's trained eye assessed automatically. Small caliber, 22 or 25. Entry wound, lower right quadrant. Exit wound, she shifted slightly to see upper left back. Trajectory suggests shooter was below target, on ground or kneeling. Professional positioning. But her attention was immediately drawn to something else. Tattoos. Extensive tattoos covering the patient's chest and arms. Not the amateur ink of suburban rebellion. These were professional, expensive, intricate dragons coiled across his pectoral muscles. Koi fish swam up his biceps. Cherry blossoms and kanji characters covered his shoulders. And they're partially obscured by blood in the trauma team's hands, a specific pattern. A chrysanthemum with 16 petals. The imperial seal. Alexandra's breath stopped. She knew that symbol, had seen it in intelligence briefings, in photographs of organized crime figures, in the dossiers of men who killed with the efficiency of corporate executives and the morality of sharks. Yakuza, specifically Sumiyoshi Kai, one of the 3 major families operating in Los Angeles. A white American with authentic Yakuza tattoos meant one thing: deep cover operative, which meant this wasn't a random shooting, which meant there would be follow-up, which meant danger. Cane glove up, Dr. Elena Mercer's voice cut through Alexandra's analysis. The trauma chief stood at the head of the table. Late 40s, steel gray hair pulled back in a military tight bun. The kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from seeing too much death and refusing to accept one more unnecessary casualty. She looked at Alexandra with sharp eyes, assessing eyes, eyes that had seen combat and recognized its markers in others. "I need you on pressure management. This is a through and through GSW, possibly involving intestines. We need to stabilize before we can get him to surgery." "Yes, doctor." Alexandra pulled on gloves. Her hands deliberately fumbled with the latex, made a show of struggling to get them on properly. The incompetent nurse everyone expected. But once gloved, she moved to the patient's side with steps that were suddenly efficient, controlled. The muscle memory of 15 years in trauma surgery taking over despite her conscious attempt to appear clumsy. Up close, she could see more details. The gunshot was clean, professional. Small caliber meant less tissue damage, but higher precision requirement. The trajectory suggested the shooter had been aiming for the femoral artery, but hit low. Either an amateur mistake or the victim had moved at the last second. Given the Yakuza connection, Alexandra suspected the latter. "BP is 98/62, one of the ER nurses called out. Young, maybe 25. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the blood pressure cuff. First major trauma, Alexandra assessed. Still has hope that everyone lives. Heart rate 118. He's tachycardic but stable. "Lexi, I need pressure here." Mercer indicated a bleeding site on the patient's lower abdomen, where a vessel had been nicked. Not life-threatening yet, but could become so quickly if not controlled. "Direct pressure. Don't let up." Alexandra placed her hands on the wound site. Beneath the gloves, her hands were absolutely steady. She applied pressure. Firm. Controlled. Exactly the right amount. Not enough to cause additional tissue damage. Sufficient to control the bleeding. The kind of pressure that came from performing this exact procedure hundreds of times under conditions far worse than a well-lit trauma bay. She felt the pulse beneath her fingers, rapid but strong. The heart was compensating well. Blood volume was adequate. This kid would survive, if the people who shot him didn't come to finish the job. Mercer glanced at Alexandra. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The trauma chief's expression flickered with something: recognition, curiosity, the look of a fellow veteran seeing another soldier's discipline shine through a civilian disguise. But she said nothing, returned her attention to the patient. "Someone get hospital security up here," Mercer ordered. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of command. "And call LAPD. This is gang-related shooting and we need police presence before his friends show up." As if summoned by prophecy, the trauma bay doors burst open. 3 men entered. They wore expensive dark suits, Italian cut, tailored to conceal the muscular builds beneath. At their collars and wrists, the edges of extensive tattoos were visible. Traditional Japanese imagery. Dragons, waves, samurai warriors. The lead man stepped forward, tallest of the 3, maybe 5'11", shaved head. A scar ran from his left ear to his jaw like a fault line in flesh. His suit jacket hung open enough to reveal elaborate tattoos covering his neck. More waves, more dragons. Art that cost tens of thousands of dollars and represented commitment to a life most people only saw in movies. "We're here for Grant," he said. His English was good, native, no accent, which meant American-born, which meant 3rd or 4th generation Yakuza, which meant this organization had deep roots in Los Angeles. "Wesley Grant," the man continued. "He's our associate. We're taking him now." Dr. Mercer stepped forward, placed herself between the men and her patient, a 5'6" woman in scrubs facing down 3 armed gangsters. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. This man has a serious gunshot wound. He needs surgery immediately. You can wait until you don't understand." The lead man pulled back his jacket slightly. A holstered pistol became visible, compact, probably a Glock 26, favored by professionals because of its reliability and concealability. "We're not asking." The trauma bay went silent. All movement stopped. Everyone froze. Everyone except Alexandra. Her hands remained on Wesley Grant's wound, applying steady pressure, but her eyes were working, cataloging, assessing. 3 visible gang members, all armed. She could tell by the way their jackets hung. Weight distribution, the subtle pull of concealed firearms, probably all carrying Glocks. Standard Yakuza preference for operations in the United States. Probability of additional members outside the trauma bay high. Elevator position 20 meters to their back. Stairwell 15 meters to the left. 23 people in the trauma bay, including patients in other beds. Including elderly woman in bed 1 recovering from a stroke. Including teenage boy in bed 4 with a broken arm. Civilians, innocents, her responsibility. "Sir, I understand your concern for your friend." Mercer's voice remained remarkably steady, the kind of steady that came from military training, from learning to control fear through discipline and repetition. "But if we move him now, he will die. Is that what you want?" The lead Yakuza member's jaw tightened. His hand moved closer to his weapon. And that's when everything went to hell. The trauma bay doors exploded open again. 7 more men entered. These were different, older, heavier tattoos visible at their collars and wrists. More expensive suits. The kind of presence that changed the atmosphere of a room simply by entering it. The first 3 Yakuza members straightened immediately, showed deference, the body language of subordinates recognizing authority. The lead man was in his 50s, silver hair slicked back with precision, his entire neck covered in intricate tattoo work that disappeared beneath his collar. Full bodysuit Alexandra recognized, the mark of a high-ranking member, probably lieutenant or counselor level. He walked with the confidence of a man who'd ordered deaths and slept soundly afterward. "Who is Grant?" he demanded. His English was perfect, educated, no accent whatsoever. The first lead man pointed to Wesley Grant on the table. "Kobayashi-san, this is Grant. He was shot 2 hours ago outside the warehouse district. We're taking him to our doctor." Kobayashi. Alexandra's mind accessed intelligence files she'd memorized years ago. Takeshi Kobayashi, 55 years old, lieutenant in the Sumiyoshikai organization, suspected of involvement in multiple homicides, never convicted, protected by lawyers and legitimate business fronts that made him appear to be nothing more than a successful import-export entrepreneur. Dangerous didn't begin to describe him. Kobayashi stepped closer, looked at Wesley Grant with eyes that held no warmth, no concern, only calculation. Then his gaze swept the room, assessing, cataloging. When his eyes landed on Alexandra's small hunch trembling, they passed over her without interest, dismissed her as irrelevant. A mistake, Alexandra thought, but a useful one. "This is St. Mary's Hospital," Kobayashi said slowly. His voice was quiet, controlled. the kind of quiet that was more threatening than shouting. Not Memorial Hospital. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Sir," the first lead man said. His voice held confusion and the first edge of fear. "We had information that a protected witness, a man who betrayed the family, is being held at a Los Angeles hospital under FBI protection. We thought it was here." Kobayashi's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. "It's not." His voice dropped even lower. "Memorial Hospital is 5 blocks north of this location. We came to the wrong hospital." "Oh no," Alexandra thought. Everything changed with those words. "Then we leave," one of the younger Yakuza said quickly. "Before police arrive. We relocate to Memorial and no." Kobayashi's single word cut through the suggestion like a blade. "We've already exposed ourselves here. There are cameras." He gestured to the security camera mounted in the corner. "Witnesses." His hand swept across the trauma-based staff. "The doctor called police. I heard her." Mercer said nothing, but her expression confirmed everything. Kobayashi nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. "This hospital has become a problem. We cannot leave witnesses to our presence. We cannot risk identification." He pulled a pistol from inside his jacket. Sleek, suppressed, a Glock 19 with a professional-grade silencer. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it casually at his side, like a businessman might hold a briefcase. "No one leaves," Kobayashi said. "No one makes calls. We secure this location until we can determine the best course of action. Everyone away from the doors. Now." The trauma-based staff began backing away. Patients in beds looked terrified. One of the nurses, young early 20s, her whole career ahead of her, was crying silently. Alexandra kept her hands on Wesley Grant's wound, kept her head down, kept her entire body language screaming one message: "Don't notice me. I'm not a threat. I'm invisible." Because 15 years of survival had taught her one crucial lesson. When predators entered the room, the safest strategy was to be too small, too weak, too irrelevant to bother with. Let them focus on the obvious threats. Let them dismiss the trembling nurse with her hands in a patient's blood. And when the moment came, if the moment came, they'd never see her coming. Kobayashi was speaking in rapid Japanese now, giving orders to his men. Alexandra understood every word. 2 years stationed in Okinawa as part of a joint medical training operation had left her fluent in Japanese. Another skill she kept hidden. Another weapon in an arsenal no one knew she possessed. "Secure all exits," Kobayashi was saying. "Position men at the stairwells and elevators. If anyone tries to leave, shoot them. If anyone attempts to contact police, shoot them. We hold this position for 20 minutes. That gives us time to assess whether police response is already en route. If not, we relocate to Memorial. If police arrive, we have hostages." The Yakuza members dispersed with military precision. This wasn't their first hostile takeover. They'd done this before. Alexandra's mind was calculating rapidly. 10 Yakuza members confirmed, probably more arriving as backup. All armed, all trained. Hospital with approximately 200 civilians. Patients, staff, visitors. People who came here to be healed and were now caught in a situation that could turn into a massacre. Police response time to a hostage situation: 12 to 15 minutes from the moment someone triggered an alarm. But Dr. Mercer hadn't completed her call. Security might notice something wrong, might call it in, or might not. This was about to become a bloodbath if not handled correctly. "Doctor." Alexandra's voice was barely above a whisper, directed at Mercer. The trauma chief looked at her. "The patient's bleeding has slowed. I can apply a pressure dressing and secure it. He'll be stable for transport." Mercer's eyes widened slightly, surprised that the incompetent floor nurse could assess patient stability so accurately. "Can you?" Yes, do that." Alexandra's hands moved with sudden confidence. The trembling stopped. She applied the pressure dressing with expert precision. Years of trauma surgery condensed into efficient movements. Securing the wound, stabilizing the patient. Her hands moved the way they had in field hospitals. In combat zones, in places where hesitation meant death. Wesley Grant's vitals held steady. He'd survive. If Alexandra could keep everyone else alive long enough for police to arrive. Kobayashi noticed. He stepped closer, watching Alexandra's hands as they worked. "You know trauma medicine," he said, not a question, an observation. Alexandra didn't meet his eyes, kept her voice small, frightened. I took some extra training, sir. Basic emergency response. I just want to help." "You're very calm for someone who should be scared." "I'm terrified, sir." She let her hands tremble again. Deliberately. a conscious choice to appear weak. I'm just trying to help, trying to do my job. Kobayashi studied her for another moment, then turned away, dismissed her again as irrelevant. And in that dismissal, Alexandra saw her advantage. They didn't see her as a threat. They saw a scared nurse, a small woman with trembling hands and hunched shoulders, someone too weak to matter. They had no idea they were looking at Colonel Alexandra Kane, combat surgeon, special operations veteran, a woman who'd walked through hell and come out the other side with scars that would never fully heal, but with skills that would never fade. A woman who'd spent 15 years hiding, but who was running out of time to stay hidden. Because somewhere in this hospital, an alarm would sound. Security would notice. Police would come. And when they did, these men would start killing hostages. Unless someone stopped them first. Alexandra kept her hands on Wesley Grant's wound, kept her head down, and began calculating exactly how many seconds she had left before she had to make a choice. Stay hidden and watch innocent people die, or reveal everything she'd been hiding for 15 years. Her eyes found Rebecca across the trauma bay, the kind head nurse who'd defended her, who had a 16-year-old daughter named Emma fighting leukemia, who came to work every day despite crushing medical bills because people needed her. Found Dr. Mercer, the trauma chief who'd served her country, who treated patients with skill and compassion, who'd never once made Alexandra feel less than human. Found the young nurse who was crying, who had her whole life ahead of her. Found the elderly stroke patient in bed 1, someone's grandmother, someone's mother. Found the teenage boy with the broken arm in bed 4, scared eyes, whole life still to live. 200 people, 200 lives, and only one person in this hospital who knew how to fight the kind of war that was about to start. Alexandra took a slow breath. Her hands stopped trembling. Her shoulders began to straighten, just slightly, just enough. Because Colonel Alexandra Reaper Kane was about to do what she'd sworn she'd never do again. She was about to go to war, and God help anyone who stood in her way. The emergency alarm started screaming 3 minutes later. Somewhere in St. Mary's Hospital, someone had realized what was happening. A security guard monitoring cameras. A nurse on another floor noticing the unusual activity. A patient's family member trying to visit and finding doors locked. It didn't matter who. What mattered was the sound. A piercing electronic wail that echoed through every corridor. Red lights began flashing in rhythmic pulses. The automated announcement system kicked in with its pre-recorded message. Code Silver, Code Silver. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. This is not a drill. Code Silver meant active shooter. Kobayashi's expression went cold as Arctic ice. Saido Toyam, he barked in Japanese. Secure the main doors. Nakamura checked the stairwell. Anyone tries to enter, kill them. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly with thumbs that moved with surprising speed for a man his age. Reinforcements are 10 minutes out, he said, switching back to English. Probably for the benefit of the hospital staff. A psychological tactic. Let them know rescue wasn't coming fast enough. We hold this position for 20 minutes, then we relocate. Dr. Mercer stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Please, let the patients go. They're not a threat to you. They can't identify you. Just let them... Everyone sits, Kobayashi interrupted. His voice carried no emotion, no anger, just absolute certainty. Hands visible. Anyone reaches for a phone, they die. Anyone tries to help when police arrive, they die. You follow instructions, maybe you live. The staff and mobile patients sank to the floor. Rebecca was crying now, quiet tears running down her face, thinking of Emma, of her daughter who needed her mother to survive this, to come home, to keep fighting the leukemia that was trying to steal a 16-year-old's future. The young nurse, her name tag read Jennifer Moss, was hyperventilating, panic attack building, the kind that could turn into screaming if not controlled. Alexandra remained kneeling beside Wesley Grant's bed, her hands still on his dressing. But her eyes were working, counting positions, cataloging weapons, calculating probabilities. Door guard leaning against the wall, tired posture, poor discipline. He'd been standing too long. Muscles were fatiguing. Response time would be slower by half a second, maybe a full second. Stairwell guards, 3 men focused outward, watching for police entry, not watching the people inside the trauma bay. Classic mistake. Assuming the threat comes from outside. Kobayashi, center of the room, weapon held professionally. Former military Alexandra assessed. The way he stood. The way he held the gun. This wasn't a street thug who'd learned to shoot from movies. This was someone who'd had training. And then she saw movement through the windows. 3 hospital security officers, advancing toward the trauma bay with weapons drawn. Brave, stupid, about to die. They were coming from the east corridor, moving in a tactical formation that looked professional but wasn't. Security guards playing soldier. They'd probably had some training. Probably thought they were ready. They weren't. The Yakuza members were professionals. This was going to be a massacre. 10 seconds to decide. Stay hidden and watch 3 security guards die. Stay hidden and watch the Yakuza panic and start executing hostages. Stay hidden and let everything she'd sworn to prevent happen right in front of her. Or act. Reveal 15 years of secrets. Expose herself. Become a target again. Become the person she'd been running from. Alexandra thought of the security guards advancing. Someone's husband. Someone's father. Someone's son. Thought of Rebecca crying. Of Emma who needed her mother. Thought of Dr. Mercer who'd served her country and deserved better than dying in her own trauma bay. Thought of Jennifer hyperventilating. Of the elderly stroke patient. Of the teenage boy with the broken arm. Thought of her oath. First do no harm. She'd taken that oath twice. Once as a doctor, once as a soldier. Time was up. Alexandra leaned close to Dr. Mercer, whispered 5 words that changed everything. In 5 seconds, hit the floor. Mercer's eyes went wide. What? Don't ask, don't think, just do it, now. Something in Alexandra's voice, the command, the certainty, the absolute authority made Mercer drop without hesitation. And Alexandra moved. Her body transformed in the space between heartbeats, shoulders squared, spine straightened, hands absolutely still. The trembling, incompetent nurse vanished like morning fog under desert sun. In her place stood Colonel Alexandra Kane. The scalpel she'd palmed earlier flashed in fluorescent light. Her left hand grabbed the nearest Yakuza guard's gun hand, redirected the weapon away from center mass. Textbook disarmament, the kind drilled into muscle memory through 10,000 repetitions. Her right hand slashed. The scalpel opened his wrist to bone. Tendons severed, his hand spasmed open. The Glock fell. Alexandra caught it midair with her left hand, never stopped moving. She pivoted, used the now disarmed guard as a shield. Her right arm wrapped around his throat, controlling his body, making him dead weight between her and the other armed men. The other Yakuza members were turning. Too slow. Combat happens in fractions of seconds. The difference between trained and untrained is the difference between life and death. Alexandra had 15 years of training. She fired 3 shots. First shot shoulder wound on the door guard, high right shoulder, disabling but not lethal. Dropped his weapon arm. Second shot thigh wound on the nearest stairwell guard, femoral region but deliberately missing the artery. He went down screaming, weapon clattered away. Third shot fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. The pressurized container exploded. White chemical foam erupted in a massive cloud. Instant concealment. Alexandra released the guard she'd been using as a shield, shoved him forward into the expanding cloud. Used the momentum to drop and roll left. Behind the crash cart, metal shield between her and return fire. Everyone down, she shouted. Not the timid voice of Lexi Kane. The command voice of Colonel Alexandra Kane. Officer voice. The kind of voice that made people obey without thinking. Get behind the beds. Stay low. Do it now. Staff scrambled. Patients dropped. Rebecca grabbed Jennifer and pulled her behind a gurney. The security guards burst through the doors. Wrong timing, wrong positioning. Everything Alexandra had feared. One of them fired. Wild shot. Panicked. The round missed the Yakuza members completely. Hit an IV pole. Metal on metal. The bullet ricocheted. Alexandra tracked its trajectory. Physics and ballistics. Angles she could calculate faster than most people could think. The round was heading for the elderly patient in bed 1. Someone's grandmother. Someone who'd survived a stroke and didn't deserve to die from friendly fire. Alexandra dove. Left shoulder first. Intercepted the round with her own body. Pain exploded, white hot. The bullet punched through her left shoulder. Through and through, clean entry and exit. Missing bone by centimeters. Missing the subclavian artery by less. She'd been shot before. Knew what it felt like. Knew how to function through it. She rolled, came up on her right side, gun still in her right hand, steady despite the blood now running down her left arm. Fired 3 more times. 3 more Yakuza members dropped. Leg shots, disabling wounds, non-lethal if they got medical attention within the hour. She wasn't here to kill. She was here to stop the killing. Cease fire, she roared at the security guards. You don't have clear shots. You're hitting civilians. Her voice carried over the chaos, carried over the screaming, carried over everything. The kind of voice that came from 15 years of commanding soldiers in combat. The security guards froze. Something in that voice penetrated their panic, made them recognize authority, made them obey. They began pulling civilians toward the exits, following her orders without question. Because that's what people did when someone who actually knew what they were doing took command. But Kobayashi still had Rebecca. The silver-haired lieutenant had moved faster than Alexandra expected. Combat training, real combat training. He'd grabbed Rebecca during the confusion. Gun to her temple now, backing toward the stairwell, using her as a shield. "Everyone stops," he said, voice still calm, still controlled. "Or she dies." Alexandra stood. Blood ran down her left arm, soaked into her scrubs, dripped onto the floor. But her gun hand was steady. Her aim was perfect. She had the shot, could put a round through Kobayashi's right eye from this distance without scratching Rebecca, had made harder shots under worse conditions. But she didn't take it, because the moment she killed him, his men would open fire, and civilians would die. "Let her go," Alexandra said. Her voice was ice. No fear, no hesitation, just absolute certainty. Kobayashi stared at her, really looked at her for the first time, saw past the small frame and the nurse's scrubs, saw something that made his expression change. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she was. Soldier recognizing soldier. Predator recognizing predator. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm exactly what I need to be." Alexandra's gray-blue eyes locked onto his. "Your operation is blown. Police are coming. Backup won't arrive in time. You have two choices. Surrender and live, or stay and die here." For a long moment standoff. Kobayashi's jaw tightened. His finger on the trigger. Rebecca whimpering. Alexandra's gun never wavering. Then Kobayashi spoke in rapid Japanese to his remaining men. "Fall back, to the stairwell. Covering fire. We regroup outside." He shoved Rebecca forward. Hard. She stumbled. Alexandra caught her with her injured left arm. Pain screamed. She ignored it, kept her gun trained on Kobayashi. The Yakuza members retreated, firing shots as they went, suppressed weapons making soft coughing sounds, rounds punching into walls, into equipment, into everything except people because Alexandra had positioned herself between them and the civilians, taking fire, drawing their attention. By the time she reached the stairwell door, they were gone, footsteps echoing down the stairs, fading. Rebecca collapsed against her, sobbing. "Thank you, thank you, oh God, thank you." Alexandra held her awkwardly, blood pooling beneath her feet now. She was losing more than she thought. The adrenaline was fading. The pain was building. Dr. Mercer appeared, pale, shaking, but moving with purpose. "Kane, your shoulder, that's a through and through. Missed major vessels, but you're bleeding. We need to—" "I'll be fine," Alexandra said. Her voice was starting to sound distant, blood loss catching up. "What you just did?" Mercer stared. "That wasn't nursing. That was military combat. Elite military combat. What are you?" Alexandra swayed. The trauma bay was spinning slightly. She looked around, staff staring with shock and awe, injured Yakuza members being restrained by security. Wesley Grant still on the table, still alive, vitals steady. Dr. Harlow standing in the doorway, mouth open, completely bewildered. Alexandra looked at him, met his eyes. Even through the blood loss, she couldn't resist. "Dr. Harlow," she said, voice returning to its timid tone even as blood ran down her arm. "I think I need to sit down now." Her legs gave out. Mercer caught her. "Someone get trauma supplies," the chief shouted. "I need a gurney. Move." As Alexandra's vision tunneled, she heard Rebecca's voice. "Who is she really?" And Mercer's response, amazed, awed. "I think we're about to find out." Alexandra's last thought before darkness took her was simple. The invisible nurse just became very, very visible, and there was no going back. She woke to hands on her shoulder, professional hands, practiced, working with the efficiency that came from thousands of procedures. Antiseptic smell, the distinctive click and hum of surgical instruments. Operating room. "She's coming around," a male voice said. Young, probably a resident. "Let her wake up," Dr. Mercer replied. "I have questions." Alexandra's gray-blue eyes opened. She was on an operating table in OR3, surrounded by surgical lights that were currently dimmed to avoid blinding her. Dr. Mercer stood over her, working on her shoulder wound. The room was otherwise empty except for one surgical tech. Door closed, secured, private. "Welcome back, Kane," Mercer said, not looking up from her work. Or should I call you something else because incompetent floor nurse clearly isn't your real identity? Alexandra's mind calculated. How long was she out? What had happened? Whether police had arrived? Whether the Yakuza had escaped? Whether civilians were safe? How long, she asked. 20 minutes. Blood loss and adrenaline crash. Not uncommon after combat. Mercer tied off a suture. The bullet went clean through, no major damage. You'll have another scar to match the others. She paused meaningfully. And you have a lot of others. Shrapnel scarring on your hands, burns on your left torso, emergency laparotomy scar. These aren't accidents, Kane. These are combat injuries. Alexandra said nothing. Mercer set down her instruments, pulled off her gloves, looked Alexandra directly in the eyes. I served too, she said quietly. Army Medical Corps, Major, Gulf War 1991. I know combat trauma. I know how soldiers move. I know the difference between someone who's seen action and someone who's playing pretend. She leaned closer. What you did in that trauma bay was tactically brilliant. You disarmed a trained killer in under 2 seconds. You used concealment. You took precise, non-lethal shots under pressure. That's not from reading medical journals. That's from doing it. Alexandra met her gaze, calculating. Could she trust Mercer? Did she have a choice? I made calls while you were out, Mercer continued, to Walter Reed, to Fort Bragg. Described you to some contacts I still have in the military medical community. 5'4", early 30s, dirty blonde hair, gray-blue eyes, scar above left eyebrow, shrapnel scarring, burn marks. She pulled her phone from her pocket, showed Alexandra a military personnel file. A photograph, younger Alexandra, in uniform, colonel's insignia. Colonel Alexandra Elizabeth Kane, Mercer's read, served 15 years in special operations, combat surgeon, multiple deployments, attached to 75th Ranger Regiment and 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. She scrolled, awarded 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit. Medically retired 5 years ago after injuries sustained in Kandahar province. Another scroll. Officially died in a car accident 2 years later. Closed casket. Death certificate filed. Silence. Just the sound of the heart monitor. Beeping steadily. Alexandra's heart rate didn't spike. Didn't change. 15 years of controlling fear had taught her that much. Except she didn't die, Mercer said softly. She disappeared. Changed her name slightly. Stone to Kane. Got a new nursing license under her modified identity and hid in plain sight as the most incompetent nurse anyone had ever seen. She sat on the edge of the operating table. Who are you really? Alexandra was silent for a long moment. Then she sat up, slowly. Pain pulled at the stitches in her shoulder. But she sat up anyway. Her posture changed completely. Shoulders squared, spine straight. The timid nurse vanished. In her place sat a colonel. Colonel Alexandra Elizabeth Kane, she said clearly. Voice carrying command authority. Special Operations Combat Surgeon. Call sign Reaper. 15 years in Joint Special Operations Command. Primarily attached to Ranger Regiment and 1st SFODD. She met Mercer's eyes. No flinching, no shame. I faked my death because the people who killed my team in Kandahar were hunting me. I had evidence of high-level corruption. Photos, recorded conversations, bank transfers. Enough to send generals to prison. Her voice hardened, but I didn't know who to trust. The corruption went too high. So I became a ghost, disappeared, started over. Why nursing? Mercer asked. Because I took an oath. First, do no harm. I couldn't stop being a doctor, couldn't stop helping people. Alexandra's voice softened slightly. But I couldn't use my real credentials without being found. So I became a nurse, became small, invisible. She looked at her scarred hands. Until tonight. Mercer absorbed this. The Yakuza members you disabled. You could have killed them. Clean shots, center mass. But you chose non-lethal force. Leg shots, shoulder wounds. Wipe bomb. Because I'm not an executioner, Alexandra said flatly. I'm a surgeon. My job is to save lives, not take them. How many lives have you saved? Stopped counting at 200. That was year 7. And how many lost? 43. Alexandra's voice went cold. Every death where I was present. Every patient who died on my table, or in my arms, or while I was trying to get to them. I remember every name, every face. Mercer studied her. That's why you hide. The guilt. Not guilt, Alexandra said sharply. I'm hiding from becoming someone I don't want to be. 15 years in combat, you start seeing people as problems to solve, threats to eliminate. You forget they're human. Her voice softened. I came back as a nurse to remember my humanity. To remember that every patient is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's mother. She touched her shoulder where Mercer had just finished suturing. Until tonight when I had to choose between staying human and letting people die. Before Mercer could respond, the doors burst open. Hospital security, 2 LAPD officers, and a woman in a dark suit with FBI credentials clipped to her belt. She was in her early 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that came from years of interrogating dangerous people and learning to see through lies. Colonel Kane, she said, I'm Special Agent Rachel Torres, FBI. We need to talk. Agent Torres approached the operating table, showed her credentials. FBI, Organized Crime Division. Colonel, we've been looking for you for 2 years. When you disappeared after your supposed death, multiple investigations into military corruption were compromised. We need your testimony. My testimony won't matter, Alexandra said. The people responsible are too protected, too connected. They were, Torres corrected, but 3 months ago a whistleblower came forward, a contractor who was part of the network. He provided additional evidence. Combined with your testimony, we can bring charges. She pulled out a tablet, showed photographs. 2 generals, 4 colonels, dozens of contractors. Faces Alexandra recognized. Men she'd respected once. Men who'd sent her team to die. General Marcus Brennan, Torres said, pointing to the first photo, Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence. He's been selling classified information for 12 years. Your team in Kandahar got too close to discovering the operation. So he eliminated the threat. Another photo. General Thomas Wade. He coordinated the ambush, changed your route orders, made sure you walked into a kill box. More photos, colonels, majors, contractors, CIA liaisons. A network, 15 years of corruption, billions of dollars in fraudulent contracts. Intelligence sold to enemies. Soldiers' lives traded for profit. If I testify, Alexandra said slowly, I lose my new identity. I'll be exposed. My face will be everywhere. Yes, Torres said honestly, but you'll get justice. For your team, for everyone they killed. Alexandra thought of Captain Rodriguez, dying in the blast, his last words asking her to tell his wife he loved her. She'd never delivered that message, because officially Colonel Alexandra Kane had died before she could. Thought of Sergeant Martinez, bleeding out. She'd held pressure on his femoral artery for 20 minutes. Hadn't been enough. Thought of Lieutenant Kim and Corporal Jackson, both killed instantly in the initial explosion. Never had a chance. I'll testify, Alexandra said, on one condition. Name it. I stay at St. Mary's. I keep being a nurse, because that's who I am now. Torres looked at Mercer. The trauma chief smiled. I'm officially promoting you to trauma coordinator. You'll train our staff in tactical medicine. Everything you know, every skill, every technique. She extended her hand. Welcome back, Colonel. Alexandra shook it. Just Alexandra. Please. The colonel died in Kandahar. I'm just a nurse now. A nurse who saved 50 lives tonight and took down a Yakuza assault team, Mercer said dryly. Sure, just a nurse. After Torres left with promises of formal statements and protective details, Mercer helped Alexandra off the operating table. Can you walk? I've walked on worse. They exited into chaos. Police everywhere. Yellow crime scene tape. Staff being interviewed. But as Alexandra walked past, people stopped. Stared. Rebecca rushed forward, careful of Alexandra's injured shoulder, hugged her anyway. You saved my life, all of us. I don't know how to... You don't need to, Alexandra said quietly. You were there for me when everyone else wasn't. When Harlow was humiliating me. When I needed someone to believe in me. You already paid it forward. Rebecca was crying again, but this time from relief, from gratitude. Dr. Harlow appeared, flanked by his residents. He looked shocked, embarrassed, like a man who'd just realized he'd been spectacularly wrong about someone. Nurse Kane, he said. His voice lacked its usual arrogance. I owe you an apology. I've treated you poorly for 8 months. You were exactly as arrogant as I expected. Alexandra interrupted. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. I was deliberately incompetent. I made you think I was weak. That was my choice. But apology accepted, Dr. Harlow. She met his eyes. As long as we're clear, if you ever speak to me or any other nurse that way again, I'll file formal complaints. And I have excellent documentation skills. Understood. Harlow's face flushed. Understood. Alexandra walked back into the trauma bay. The teenage boy with the broken arm was still there. Kyle Summers, 17 years old, calm now after the panic attack. You gave me medicine, he said as Alexandra approached. You saved us. I gave you 2 milligrams of lorazepam, Alexander said, checking his monitor. Professional, clinical. Your heart rate is 78. You're being discharged tonight, but follow up with your doctor. Consider therapy. Tonight was traumatic. Yes, ma'am, thank you. Alexandra moved to check Wesley Grant, the wounded soldier, the undercover operative with Yakuza tattoos. His vitals were stable. He'd survive. Whoever he was working for would be pleased. First, do no harm, even when the patient was probably a federal agent who'd gotten himself shot infiltrating organized crime. Even when harm might be deserved. The oath didn't have exceptions. Dr. Mercer joined her. Alexandra, what you did tonight changes everything. You can't go back to being invisible. The world knows who you are now. I know. Alexandra looked at her scarred hands, at the fresh bandage on her shoulder, at the blood still staining her scrubs. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. Be who I actually am. And who is that? Alexandra was quiet for a long moment. Someone who's spent 15 years running from the person she was. Someone who's finally ready to stop running. She touched her shoulder. I've closed enough wounds in my life. Now I just want to help people heal. Not just their bodies, their minds, their spirits. Mercer smiled. Then teach us. Combat trauma, tactical medicine, everything. Because tonight proved hospitals aren't as safe as we thought. We need to protect our patients. Alexandra nodded. Okay, my way. Minimal force. Maximum life preservation. We're training healers who can protect when necessary. Not soldiers. Healers. Deal. Later, much later, Alexandra stood at a window overlooking Los Angeles. Millions of lights against darkness. Somewhere out there, the people who'd killed her team would face justice. Somewhere life continued. And here she'd stopped running. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The scared nurse was gone. In her place herself. Finally, ready to face whatever came next. Ready to go home, Colonel. Mercer's voice behind her. Alexandra turned, smiled. A real smile. The first in 15 years. I am home, Elena. This hospital, these patients. This is home now. Mercer returned the smile. Welcome home, Alexandra. Walking toward the elevator, Alexandra felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years. Peace, not the peace of hiding, the peace of being found, the peace of being accepted for who she really was. The invisible nurse had become visible. And visibility wasn't terrifying after all. It was freedom. The morning sun cut through St. Mary's Hospital windows like surgical steel, casting long shadows across Director Richard Caldwell's office. 3 hours of sleep hadn't been enough. But Alexandra had learned long ago that rest was a luxury, not a requirement. Combat taught you to function on adrenaline and determination. Civilian life hadn't changed that. She sat with her left arm in a sling white bandage visible beneath borrowed scrubs. The ones from last night had been too blood-soaked to salvage. Across from her sat a panel that would determine whether she had a future at St. Mary's or whether the last 8 months of careful invisibility had been for nothing. Director Caldwell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. 40 years of hospital politics had given him the exhausted eyes of a man who'd seen every kind of crisis. But nothing quite like this. 2 LAPD detectives flanked him, recording devices visible on the table between them. Agent Rachel Torres sat with perfect FBI posture, sharp eyes cataloging every micro-expression on Alexandra's face. Dr. Vincent Harlow occupied the chair furthest from Alexandra, looking like a man whose understanding of reality had been fundamentally shattered overnight. Colonel Kane, Caldwell's voice was measured, careful, the tone of an administrator walking a legal tightrope. We're grateful for your actions last night. Preliminary estimates indicate you saved 53 lives. Civilians who would have died if the Yakuza had begun executing hostages. He paused, letting the weight of that number settle. However, we face significant institutional concerns. Liability exposure. Protocol violations. The fact that you've been employed here for 8 months under what amounts to a concealed identity, regardless of its technical legality. My name change was processed through proper legal channels, Alexandra said. Her voice carried the calm precision of someone accustomed to being questioned by hostile parties. My nursing license was obtained through legitimate examination by the California Board of Registered Nursing. I completed all required continuing education. I have never falsified a document or lied in any official capacity. What I chose not to volunteer about my previous career was my prerogative, not deception. You allowed us to believe you were barely competent, Dr. Harlow said. His voice still held traces of disbelief, as though he was arguing with himself as much as with her. You deliberately performed below your capability level. You made yourself appear weak when you're clearly—" He gestured helplessly at her. "Clearly not. I performed my assigned duties according to established protocols," Alexandra replied evenly. "If your assessment of my competence was based on assumption rather than objective performance metrics, that reflects a failure of observation, not a failure of ethics on my part." The silence that followed was pointed. Agent Torres leaned forward, breaking the tension. "Colonel, we need to discuss the federal case. The grand jury convenes in 14 days. Your testimony is not optional. You'll be served with a federal subpoena by end of business today. I'll comply fully. You need to understand the risks." Torres pulled out her tablet, swiped through several documents. "The individuals you're testifying against have extensive resources: financial, political, criminal. This hospital could become a target. Your colleagues could become collateral damage. We're not talking about street-level retaliation. We're talking about a network with the capability to make problems disappear." "Then provide protection," Alexandra said. "Not for me, I can handle myself, but for the staff, for the patients, for Rebecca Thornton and her daughter, for Dr. Mercer, for everyone who could be targeted because they were in proximity to me." Torres nodded. "Protective details are already being arranged, but there's a complication." She turned the tablet screen toward the room. Security camera footage played. The trauma bay. Last night, Alexandra disarming the Yakuza guard with surgical precision. The scalpel slash, the gunfire, the tactical movement. Takeshi Kobayashi is cooperating with federal investigators, attempting to negotiate a reduced sentence. He's provided intelligence suggesting his organization has maintained an informant inside St. Mary's Hospital for approximately 6 months. Someone providing patient data, federal witness locations, protected identity information. Treatment schedules for high-value targets. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caldwell's face went pale. "An insider, here." "That's his claim," Torres confirmed. "We're conducting a parallel investigation. But Colonel Kane, you've been embedded here for 8 months, operating under deep cover, essentially. You've had opportunity to observe staff behavior patterns without the distortion of social relationships. What have you noticed?" Alexandra had anticipated this question, had spent her 3 hours of restless sleep mentally reviewing 8 months of observations. "Dr. Gerald Hayes," she said slowly, "cardiology attending, 38 years old, 3-year tenure at St. Mary's. Approximately 6 months ago, his lifestyle underwent a dramatic change. New vehicle, Porsche 911 Carrera. Retail value around $120,000. Rolex Submariner watch, approximately $15,000. Designer suits, Armani, Versace, Tom Ford. Conservative estimate another $30,000 in wardrobe upgrade." She paused. "His official explanation is successful cryptocurrency investments in stock market gains. However, the timing is statistically suspicious. He also has legitimate access to the patient database for cardiac consults across all departments. I've observed him in the medical records room after hours on at least 7 occasions. Always alone. Always during shifts with minimal security presence." Torres made rapid notes on her tablet. "Anyone else?" "Marcus Flynn, IT administrator, 29 years old. He has unrestricted access to all hospital systems, patient records, security protocols, staff scheduling, camera feeds, everything." Alexandra's voice tightened slightly. "He has a gambling problem. I've observed sports betting applications on his phone during at least a dozen interactions when he was servicing computer equipment at nursing stations. Online poker, daily fantasy sports. The behavioral profile suggests significant debt accumulation, which creates classic leverage vulnerability." "Anyone on the nursing staff?" Torres asked quietly. This was the hardest part. Alexandra drew a slow breath. "I don't want to accuse anyone without conclusive evidence. But you asked for observations." "We need names, Colonel." "Rebecca Thornton." The name felt like physical weight leaving her chest. "She's been a registered nurse at St. Mary's for 20 years. Exceptional clinical skills. Compassionate patient care. She defended me when others dismissed me. She's fundamentally a good person." Alexandra's voice was quiet but steady. "But 3 months ago, her 16-year-old daughter, Emma, was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Stage 3. Aggressive presentation. The treatment protocol is extraordinarily expensive. Experimental therapies not covered by insurance. I've observed her taking phone calls from collection agencies. She's mortgaged her house, sold her vehicle, liquidated her retirement savings." She met Torres's eyes directly. "People in desperate circumstances make choices they would never otherwise consider." If someone approached her with an offer of money in exchange for what appeared to be harmless patient data, perhaps framed as insurance research or medical database compilation, she might not ask penetrating questions, especially if her daughter's life depended on that money. Torres's expression was grim. We'll investigate all three, discreetly, without alerting potential suspects. Caldwell cleared his throat. Regardless of the criminal investigation, we need to address your employment status, Colonel Kane. Dr. Mercer has submitted a formal recommendation for the creation of a new position, Director of Tactical Emergency Medicine. You would develop and implement training protocols for combat trauma scenarios. Serve as a consultant for high acuity cases. The position would be full-time salaried with comprehensive benefits. He removed his glasses, polished them with a handkerchief. However, this position requires complete transparency. Your military service record, your special operations background, your medical credentials, all of it becomes part of your official hospital personnel file. The media will discover your identity once the federal trial begins. Your face will be on every news broadcast. There will be no possibility of returning to anonymity. 15 years of hiding, ending with a signature on an employment contract. Alexandra didn't hesitate. I understand the terms. I accept. Caldwell stood, extended his hand across the desk. Welcome back to the living Colonel Kane. The meeting concluded. Alexandra walked through hospital corridors that had transformed overnight. Staff members stopped mid-conversation to stare. Whispers followed her like a wake behind a boat. The invisible woman had been irrevocably exposed. She found Dr. Mercer in the administrative wing, reviewing incident reports from the previous night's chaos. How did it go? Mercer asked without looking up from her paperwork. I'm officially employed and officially visible. Alexandra sat in the chair across from Mercer's desk, carefully favoring her injured shoulder. They're investigating the possibility of an embedded informant, someone selling patient information to criminal organizations. Mercer's pen stopped moving. She looked up sharply. Suspects. Hayes, Flynn, and Rebecca. Rebecca, Mercer's voice held genuine shock. You can't seriously believe. I don't know what to believe, Alexandra said. I know she's desperate. I know she has access. I know the timeline correlates. I also know she's a fundamentally decent person trapped in an impossible situation. Those facts don't contradict each other. They coexist. She touched her injured shoulder unconsciously, a gesture that was becoming habitual. If there is an informant and they've identified me as a threat, I've made myself a target. And anyone associated with me becomes potential collateral. Then we ensure your safety, Mercer said firmly. Hospital security has been doubled. LAPD has officers stationed on every floor. FBI is monitoring communications. You're not alone in this anymore. I've been alone for 15 years, Alexandra said quietly. I'm not entirely certain I remember how to be anything else. Mercer studied her with the assessing gaze of a fellow combat veteran. Then it's time to learn. That afternoon, Alexandra returned to her Silver Lake apartment for what she knew would be the last time. The small studio had served its purpose. Deliberately bland, deliberately forgettable. The kind of space where neighbors never learned each other's names and no one asked questions about the quiet woman in 3B who worked night shifts and kept to herself. She packed with methodical efficiency. The few possessions that mattered fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. Photographs of her fallen team kept in a locked metal box. Rodriguez with his infectious laugh. Martinez, who could disarm a bomb while cracking jokes. Kim, who'd wanted to be a surgeon after the war. Jackson, who'd carried photos of his daughter everywhere. Young faces frozen in time, forever in their 20s while she aged into her 30s. Medals in a second locked box. Silver stars, bronze stars, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit. Pieces of metal representing moments she'd spent 15 years trying to forget, but couldn't. A journal filled with 15 years of memories written in military shorthand that only she could decipher. Because some things needed to be recorded but never shared. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Every survival instinct screamed not to answer. But she was done hiding. She answered. Hello? Heavy breathing, deliberate, meant to intimidate. Then a voice, electronically distorted. Gender indeterminate, age impossible to determine. You should have stayed hidden, Colonel. Her blood went cold, but her hand remained steady. Now you're going to die exactly like your team did. Slowly, painfully, watching everyone you care about burn before your eyes. The line went dead. Alexandra immediately speed-dialed Torres. Threat received, unknown caller, electronically distorted voice. Reference Kandahar. Knew specific details about my team's deaths that weren't included in public records or media coverage. Stay exactly where you are, Torres said. Alexandra could hear a rapid typing in the background. I'm initiating a trace, sending protective units to your location. Do not leave the apartment. Do not open the door for anyone except agents who provide the authentication code I'm about to give you. Trace it fast, Alexandra said, because whoever made that call has access to classified information. They're either inside the corruption network or inside the hospital, possibly both. 2 minutes of silence. Then Torres called back. Her voice was tight with controlled urgency. Alexandra, the call originated from inside St. Mary's Hospital. 3rd floor, somewhere in the surgical wing corridor. We're cross-referencing with security camera footage now, but whoever made the call knew how to avoid camera angles. The threat wasn't external. It was inside the building, among people she worked with daily. I'm coming back, Alexandra said, already reaching for her go bag. Negative. Stay in place. We have agents. Someone in that hospital just threatened to kill civilians I care about. I'm not staying in place while innocent people are at risk. That's not who I am. She disconnected, grabbed her bag, and headed for the door. The go bag she'd kept packed for 15 years, just in case she needed to run again. But she wasn't running this time. She was going hunting. 23 minutes later, Alexandra entered St. Mary's through the emergency department entrance, deliberately avoiding main security checkpoints. 2 FBI agents intercepted her at the corridor junction. She showed them the text message that had arrived while she was in transit, unknown number. Simple message. 3rd floor, room 347, 5 minutes. Come alone or people die. The agents reached for their sidearms. No, Alexandra said. If you accompany me, whoever this is will panic. They'll either flee or start executing hostages to create chaos for escape. I go alone. Colonel, that's tactically unsound. Not negotiable, but you can maintain audio surveillance. She pulled a device from her jacket pocket. Wireless microphone. FBI issue. Torres had given it to her that morning after the administrative meeting, just in case. Wire me. You'll hear everything, but maintain distance until I signal for intervention. Understood. The agents exchanged glances, made a quick call. Torres authorized the approach. 4 minutes later, Alexandra was walking toward the 3rd floor. Room 347, post-surgical recovery, currently listed as occupied by a patient recovering from appendectomy, 62-year-old retired mathematics teacher, someone's grandfather, someone who'd survived his surgery and deserved to survive the night. The door was closed, no sounds from inside. Alexandra paused, hand on the handle. Opening this door meant walking deliberately into a trap. She knew that with absolute certainty. But not opening it might mean an innocent civilian died. She'd faced this exact choice before, 15 years ago in Kandahar province, when she'd run toward the ambush instead of away from it, when she'd chosen to save her team instead of saving herself. Most of them had died anyway, but she'd tried. She'd honored her oath. She pushed open the door. The room was dark, blinds drawn, the overhead lights off. The patient was gone. His bed had been pushed against the far wall out of position. Standing in the center of the room, holding a suppressed Glock 19 in a professional two-handed grip, was Dr. Gerald Hayes. Hello, Colonel, he said. His usual polished demeanor had vanished, replaced by something cold and mechanical. I was genuinely hoping you'd stay hidden. Would have made everything considerably easier, but you just had to play hero, didn't you? Alexandra's vision was adjusting to the low-light, cataloging details automatically. His finger was on the trigger. Distance approximately 12 feet, too far to close before he could fire. His stance was professional. Former military, she assessed. Probably special operations. The way he held the weapon wasn't something learned at a civilian shooting range. You're the informant, she said. Not a question. Keeping him talking. Buying time for the FBI to triangulate her position. I've been providing patient data to the Yakuza mob, Hayes said conversationally. Also to the Russian mob operating out of Brighton Beach, the Sinaloa cartel's Los Angeles distribution network, several Eastern European trafficking organizations, basically anyone willing to pay market rate for high-value intelligence. He smiled without warmth. St. Mary's Hospital treats federal witnesses, undercover agents, cartel informants, witness protection relocations, extraordinarily valuable information for the right buyers. He glanced at his watch. Patek Philippe Nautilus, retail value approximately $60,000. Unfortunately, you've become a significant problem. Your testimony threatens to expose individuals I work for, The same individuals who arranged the elimination of your team in Kandahar province 15 years ago. I can't allow that exposure. The FBI knows I'm here, Alexandra said. They're tracking my location. They'll be in this room within no. Hayes held up his other hand, and it was her phone. I lifted this from your jacket pocket while you were unconscious in the operating room last night. Basic pickpocketing. Learned it in the field. Powered it off immediately. They think you're still somewhere in the building, but they don't know where. Hospital's large. 47 patient rooms on the third floor alone. They'll need time to search. He moved toward the wall, opened a maintenance panel with his free hand while keeping the weapon trained on her. Inside the panel was the gas line valve. In approximately 30 minutes, there will be a tragic accident. Gas leak, explosion. Colonel Alexandra Kane, hero nurse, dies attempting to save a patient. Very tragic. Very neat. Perfect cover story. Except there's no patient here, Alexandra pointed out, keeping her voice steady. Rather undermines the narrative. There will be remains, Hayes said darkly. Dental records can be adjusted. The hospital will assume the body is yours. I have access to medical record systems. It's surprisingly simple to modify data when you know what you're doing. He began manipulating the gas valve, releasing controlled amounts into the room. The corruption network you are working for, Alexandra said. They're the same people who killed my team. Probably. I don't ask philosophical questions. I provide services, collect payment. That's the extent of my involvement. It's always personal when you're planning to kill someone, Alexandra said. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, the tone of clinical observation. That's the fundamental difference between professionals and sociopaths. Professionals acknowledge the weight of what they're doing. They understand the moral implications. Sociopaths pretend it's simply business, simply following orders, simply collecting a paycheck. Fascinating psychology lecture from the woman who's about to die. Quite charming. Hayes continued manipulating the gas valve. The smell of natural gas was becoming detectable. Rebecca's daughter, Alexandra said. Emma, the 16-year-old with leukemia. You approached Rebecca months ago, didn't you? Offered her money in exchange for patient information. She refused. But you kept the offer active, kept the door open, knowing that eventually, as her daughter's condition worsened and the medical bills accumulated, desperation would overcome mob ethics. Hayes paused, smiled slightly. You are perceptive. I'll give you that. That's why the FBI is investigating her now. You deliberately created a false trail, framed a grieving mother to provide cover for your own operations. Classic misdirection. Rebecca Thornton is the perfect scapegoat, Hayes said. Desperate financial situation, legitimate database access, emotional vulnerability, all the markers of a compromised asset. While federal investigators waste time building a case against her, I relocate to Singapore. New identity already established. Offshore accounts already populated. I'll be drinking cocktails on a beach while they're still sorting through her bank records. Except Agent Torres is searching your office right now, Alexandra said. Complete fabrication, but delivered with absolute confidence. Finding your communications, your financial records, your offshore accounts, your entire network. How else do you think I knew to name you specifically? How else would I know about the Singapore relocation plan? Hayes' grip on the weapon tightened. His expression shifted from confident to uncertain. You're bluffing. You made tactical errors, Gerald. You changed your lifestyle too dramatically, too visibly. New car, new watch, designer wardrobe. Classic signals of sudden wealth acquisition. Any competent investigator notices patterns like that. You got arrogant, sloppy. It doesn't matter. But his voice had changed, less confident, more desperate. You'll be dead in 30 minutes. I'll be on a private jet before anyone finds the evidence. No, you won't. The voice came from behind Hayes. Doctor. Elena Mercer stepped out from behind the bathroom door, holding Hayes' backup weapon, the one he'd hidden in the maintenance panel for emergency contingencies. Behind her, 2 FBI agents materialized from the adjoining recovery room, weapons drawn and trained. Hayes spun, raising his Glock. Don't move. Mercer's voice carried combat authority. Drop the weapon. It's over, Gerald, she continued. We've been monitoring everything. Colonel Kane is wearing an active wire. Your confession has been recorded and transmitted to federal servers. Your offshore accounts have been frozen. Your contacts are being arrested simultaneously in 6 different cities. You have no exit strategy. Hayes' face went pale, color draining like water from a sink. He looked between Mercer, the agents, and Alexandra, calculating odds that no longer existed. Then he made his final desperate move. He lunged at Alexandra, gun raised, last chance to eliminate the primary witness. Maybe create enough chaos to escape in the confusion. Alexandra was already moving, despite the injured shoulder, despite the sling restricting her left arm's range of motion. She dropped into a low crouch, rolled left, swept his legs with her right foot in a textbook takedown. Hayes went down hard. His gun hand hit the floor. The weapon discharged. Suppressed cough, subsonic round. It punched through acoustic ceiling tiles, sending white fragments raining down like snow. FBI agents were on him within 2 seconds. Professional restraint. Knee in his back, arms wrenched behind him. Hands behind your back, do not resist, handcuffs secured, weapon cleared and secured. Mercer moved to Alexandra, helped her stand. You okay? Functional, Alexandra said, rubbing her shoulder, where the sudden movement had stressed her stitches. Good timing, by the way. Rebecca called me, Mercer explained. Told me you'd helped arrange Emma's treatment funding. She wanted to repay the favor. She saw Hayes follow you to this floor. His behavior seemed off. She triggered a security alert and called me directly. Agent Torres entered, looking grimly satisfied. Colonel Kane, your instincts were correct. Hayes is already attempting to negotiate, offering to provide testimony against his network contacts. We're looking at 3 generals, 7 colonels, 4 federal judges, dozens of defense contractors and intelligence community personnel. This is significantly larger than we initially assessed. She pulled out her tablet, showed photographs. Faces, names, ranks, positions. A corruption network 15 years deep. Billions of dollars in fraudulent defense contracts. Classified intelligence sold to hostile foreign powers. Soldiers' lives traded for profit margins. And at the center of the web, 2 names Alexandra recognized immediately. General Marcus Brennan, General Thomas Wade. The men who'd ordered her team's execution. When do we begin? Alexandra asked quietly. 3 weeks later, Federal Courthouse, Los Angeles. The courtroom was a gladiatorial arena, dressed in oak paneling and American flags. Every seat filled. Journalists occupying the public gallery. Military officials in dress uniforms. Families of victims. People who'd been damaged by 15 years of institutional corruption and were finally seeing accountability. At the defense table sat 2 men in expensive civilian suits, their military careers already destroyed by pretrial proceedings. General Marcus Brennan, 65 years old. Silver hair that had once commanded respect, now just making him look like a grandfather facing his final judgment. General Thomas Wade, 63. Softer than Brennan, but with eyes that still held cold calculation, still searching for an angle, an escape route that didn't exist. Both had worn their dress uniforms to earlier hearings, chests covered in ribbons and medals representing decades of service. Their attorneys had advised against it. The optics of decorated generals betraying everything those decorations represented was too damaging. Alexandra stood before the judge, right hand raised. Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth and nothing but the truth? I do. The prosecutor was a woman in her 50s named Catherine Brennan, no relation to the defendant, an irony not lost on the media. Former Judge Advocate General, she knew exactly how to question military witnesses. Colonel Kane, please describe for the court what happened on August 14th, 15 years ago. Alexandra took a slow breath. This was the moment she'd been running from for 15 years. The memory she'd tried to bury under layers of new identity and deliberate incompetence. My team consisted of 18 personnel. Combat medics, intelligence specialists, communications operators, and security support. We were conducting a humanitarian medical mission in Kandahar province, Afghanistan, approximately 30 kilometers from the Pakistan border. Her voice was steady, clinical, the same tone she used when presenting trauma cases. Distance helped maintain control. We'd been embedded with local civilian population for 72 hours, providing basic medical care, vaccinations, treatment for injuries and chronic conditions. It was classified as a low-risk humanitarian operation. Hearts and minds. She paused, gathering the next words. On the morning of August 14th at approximately 0630 local time, we were ambushed during a routine patrol. The attackers demonstrated prior knowledge of our exact position, our planned route, our radio frequencies, and our security protocols. They had established prepared positions with overlapping fields of fire. We walked directly into a kill zone. How do you know the ambush was coordinated using inside information? Catherine Brennan asked. Alexandra pulled documents from the folder before her. 15-year-old photographs, mission orders, communication logs. I photographed classified materials in the hours before the attack. These photographs show our original route plan and a modification order that came through secure channels approximately 4 hours before we departed. The modification changed our route by 3 kilometers. That modification placed us directly in the ambush site. Who authorized the route modification? Alexandra pointed at the defense table, directly at Marcus Brennan. General Brennan. The order came through his office with his digital signature. The stated justification was updated intelligence regarding improved security on the modified route. She paused. That intelligence was fabricated. The modification was designed to ensure we would be killed, because my team had inadvertently obtained evidence of the corruption network. We'd provided medical treatment to a local informant who had witnessed American military personnel conducting unauthorized meetings with Taliban leadership, exchanging classified intelligence for payment. The informant survived long enough to provide us with photographs and recordings. The courtroom erupted, voices raised, journalists typing frantically, camera operators adjusting angles. The judge's gavel slammed down repeatedly. Order, I will have order in this court. Alexandra continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. I survived by taking cover under the bodies of my fallen teammates for 6 hours, waiting for extraction. I was the only survivor. During those 6 hours, I photographed the evidence we'd collected, downloaded encrypted files onto portable storage, because I understood that General Brennan held sufficient institutional authority to make evidence disappear, to make witnesses disappear. Well, so you chose to disappear first, the prosecutor said. Yes, I faked my death, created a new civilian identity, spent 15 years in hiding, because the alternative was being eliminated like my team, like anyone else who threatened to expose the network. The testimony continued for 6 hours across 2 days. Documents presented and entered into evidence. Bank transfer records showing millions of dollars moving through shell corporations. Encrypted communications that FBI cyber forensics had spent 3 years decrypting. Photographs of meetings that should never have occurred. Testimony from other witnesses who'd been threatened into silence. A corruption network spanning 3 continents. Operating for 15 years. $20 billion in fraudulent defense contracts. Classified intelligence sold to hostile foreign powers. Soldiers deployed into ambushes to eliminate inconvenient witnesses. When the prosecution rested, Alexandra stepped down from the witness stand. The generals were already being led away in restraints. More arrests would follow. 47 people ultimately indicted. The largest military corruption prosecution in United States history. The judge called a 20-minute recess before cross-examination would begin. Alexandra walked into the courthouse hallway flanked by Agent Torres and 2 FBI bodyguards. The hallway was crowded. Defense attorneys consulting with clients. Journalists attempting to grab interviews. Court staff moving between chambers. She was heading toward the secured witness waiting room when she saw him. A man in a bailiff's uniform, mid-40s, average height, unremarkable appearance. The kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, but his eyes were wrong, too focused, too intent, tracking her movement with precision that didn't match his civilian role and his stance. The way his weight was distributed, the way his hand hovered near his waistband. Military training. Her threat assessment screamed. He moved, hand reaching inside his uniform jacket. Everything shifted into tactical time. That strange deceleration that combat veterans experience when violence erupts. Seconds stretching like taffy. Alexandra saw the weapon emerging. Compact pistol, suppressed barrel. He was approximately 10 feet away. Professional shooting distance. He was drawing. Acquiring target. Preparing to fire center mass. She moved, didn't think. Muscle memory took over. 15 years of training, executing without conscious thought. Step 1. She pivoted hard left, out of his direct firing line. His first shot went wide by inches. Suppressed cough. Subsonic round hit marble wall behind where she'd been standing. Chips of stone exploded outward. Step 2. She closed the distance, moved inside his effective range before he could adjust his aim. Step 3. Her right hand trapped his gun hand, controlled the weapon, redirected the muzzle upward and away from everyone in the corridor. Step 4. Her left-hand injured shoulder, screaming in protest, struck his elbow joint, hyperextension, forcing the joint beyond its natural range. The pistol clattered to the marble floor. Step 5. She used his momentum against him. As he tried to pull away, she assisted the movement, swept his legs. He went down hard. Step 6. She controlled his descent, knee on his spine, her good hand twisting his arm behind his back into full compliance position. 3 moves, 4.6 seconds from draw to disarm to restraint. FBI agents swarmed immediately. Weapons drawn. Federal agents do not move. The fake bailiff was secured, weapons cleared, handcuffs applied. Torres knelt beside Alexandra. Are you injured? Negative. Alexandra stood, adrenaline making her hands shake slightly. She forced them steady through sheer will. The fake bailiff stared at her, genuine shock in his eyes. They said you were a nurse, he muttered. Just a nurse working nights. They said it would be simple. Walk up, 2 shots, escape in the confusion. Who hired you? Torres demanded. The man smiled. Despite the handcuffs, despite the federal agents, despite the fact that his life was effectively over. You already know. Same people she's testifying against. They wanted to send a message. No one exposes the network and survives. He looked at Alexandra. You got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it, Alexandra said quietly. Torres pulled him to his feet. Other agents moved in to transport him. The hallway had erupted into chaos. Journalists shouting questions, security clearing civilians, courthouse locked down. One of Alexandra's FBI bodyguards approached her. Young, maybe 28. Still had the buzz cut and bearing of recent military service. Ma'am, I've never seen a disarmament that clean. Where did you train? 15 years of necessity, Alexandra said simply. The courtroom reconvened 90 minutes later. Security tripled. Every person entering screened. Weapons detection enhanced. Additional federal marshals positioned throughout. The assassination attempt had rattled everyone, except Alexandra. She returned to the witness stand for cross-examination with the same clinical calm she'd maintained throughout. Defense attorneys attempted to discredit her testimony, questioned her mental state, suggested PTSD had distorted her memories, implied financial motivation, painted her as a disgruntled former officer seeking revenge for a combat casualty event that was simply the tragedy of war. She answered every question with precise documented responses. When they questioned her memory, she recited names, dates, times, grid coordinates from 15 years ago with perfect accuracy. When they suggested psychiatric instability, she calmly noted that she'd maintained successful civilian employment for 8 years, saved 53 lives during a crisis, and had just successfully defended herself against an armed assassination attempt. When they implied ulterior motives, she simply stated, I'm a nurse. I make $48,000 annually. The corruption network you're defending stole $20 billion. I have no financial motivation. I have a moral obligation to my fallen teammates. The cross-examination collapsed. Jury deliberated for 8 hours. Verdict guilty. All counts, all defendants, both generals, all 4 colonels, every contractor, every intelligence community participant. 47 convictions total. Sentences ranging from 15 years to life imprisonment without parole. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded Alexandra. Colonel Kane, how does it feel to finally get justice? What would you say to the families of your fallen team members? Are you afraid there will be more retaliation attempts? Agent Torres and FBI bodyguards created a protective corridor, guided her to a waiting vehicle. Inside the car, Torres spoke quietly. You did it. You destroyed them. They destroyed themselves, Alexandra replied. I simply provided the evidence they tried to bury. What happens now? Alexandra looked back at the courthouse, at her face on every television screen visible through the windows, at journalists still shouting questions at empty space. The invisible nurse was now the most visible person in America. Now I go back to work, back to St. Mary's, back to being what I should have been all along, a healer who can protect when necessary. 6 weeks later, St. Mary's Hospital had transformed. A professional banner stretched across the main entrance. Welcome back, Colonel Kane. Staff members lined the hallway applauding as Alexandra entered. No more hunched shoulders, no more hesitant steps, no more performance of weakness. She walked with the confident stride of someone who'd finally stopped hiding. Dr. Mercer met her at the main corridor junction. Ready for your first official day as Director of Tactical Emergency Medicine. Ready. They walked to Conference Room C, where 20 nurses and doctors waited. Young faces, eager expressions, some nervous, all present voluntarily. Good evening, Alexandra began. Her voice carried natural authority now, no longer hidden behind timid whispers. I'm Colonel Alexandra Kane. Some of you knew me as Lexi, the incompetent floor nurse, who couldn't manage a medication cart without causing disasters. A few nervous laughs rippled through the group. I was invisible by deliberate choice. It taught me something valuable. We see what we expect to see. We judge people by superficial appearances. We assume weakness when we should recognize hidden strength. She rolled up her sleeve, showed the shrapnel scars, the burn marks, the surgical scars from field operations. These represent 15 years of combat medicine, gunshot wounds, IED injuries, chemical exposure, mass casualty events, conditions that would paralyze most civilian practitioners with fear. She looked at each person individually. I'm going to teach you everything I know, not to make you soldiers, to make you protectors, because hospitals are not safe sanctuaries anymore. They're targets, and we need to be prepared. The training program began. Over the following months, Alexandra systematically transformed St. Mary's trauma protocols, triage procedures for active shooter scenarios, improvised medical equipment techniques, psychological management of mass casualty events, tactical patient extraction under hostile conditions, integration protocols between medical staff and law enforcement, security awareness training. The program became a national model. Other hospitals requested her curriculum, her protocols, her expertise. Medical journals published her methodologies. She received invitations to speak at conferences, but she remained at St. Mary's, teaching, treating patients, maintaining direct clinical contact, because she was a nurse first, an instructor second. Rebecca's daughter Emma received the experimental leukemia treatment that had been financially impossible, funded through hospital emergency assistance programs and staff donations that Alexandra had quietly organized. Emma responded extraordinarily well, entered full remission within 6 months. Rebecca joined Alexandra's tactical medicine program as an assistant instructor, teaching other nurses how to protect their patients while maintaining their fundamental identity as healers. Dr. Harlow issued a formal public apology in front of the entire surgical department, attended by hospital administration. He admitted his arrogance, his dismissiveness, his failure to recognize value in people he deemed beneath his consideration. He enrolled in Alexandra's training course, proved to be an excellent student, humble now, eager to learn. He became an active advocate for nursing professional development and institutional respect. Dr. Gerald Hayes received 25 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. The corruption network was systematically dismantled, 47 individuals arrested, convictions ranging from 15 years to life, $20 billion in fraudulent defense contracts exposed and terminated, classified intelligence compromises identified and remediated. Military reform legislation passed through Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support, named the Reed-Cain Military Accountability Act. After Wesley Grant, the undercover operative Alexandra had saved that first night, and after Alexandra herself, 2 months after the trial concluded, Alexandra stood on the hospital roof at sunset overlooking Los Angeles, the city where she'd hidden for 8 years, the city where she'd been found, the city that had somehow become home. Footsteps behind her. Dr. Mercer approached with 2 cups of coffee. "You changed everything," Mercer said, handing one to Alexandra. "This hospital, these people, the entire approach to emergency medicine." "We changed each other," Alexandra corrected. "You gave me opportunity when I was hiding." Rebecca trusted her instincts. Even Harlow learned humility. Growth was collaborative, not individual. "Well, what about you? Did you find what you needed?" Alexandra considered the question seriously. Justice for her team. Achieved. Corruption network destroyed. Achieved. Purpose rediscovered. Achieved. Identity integrated instead of fragmented. It achieved. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I found what I needed. Any regrets about giving up invisibility? Only that I wasted 15 years hiding when I could have been helping people openly. 15 years of potential good that was sacrificed to fear." Her phone vibrated. Text message from Agent Torres. "All 47 defendants sentenced. Largest military corruption case in U.S. history. Justice served. You can rest now." Alexandra stared at the message. Thought of Rodriguez laughing at terrible jokes. Martinez humming off-key while working. Kim discussing his post-military medical school plans. Jackson showing everyone photos of his daughter. "I kept my promise," she whispered. The wind carried her words away across the city, but it felt like acknowledgement, like her fallen teammates could finally rest. Rebecca appeared in the rooftop doorway, Emma beside her. The girl wore a celebratory button, 150 days remission, smiling, healthy, alive, full of the energy that teenage girls should have. "Colonel Kane," Emma said, "you saved my mom that night, and you helped save me with the treatment funding. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you stay strong for 15 years alone?" Alexandra knelt to Emma's eye level on. "I didn't stay strong. That's the misconception. I hid. I pretended to be weak because I was terrified of what my strength had cost me. Terrified of the person I'd become in combat. terrified of losing my humanity. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being terrified. It's showing up every day, even when you want to run, every single day. I want to be a combat medic, like you, Emma said. When I'm older, I want to help people the way you helped us. Alexandra felt something break loose in her chest, a wall she'd maintained for 15 years. Her eyes welled, but she didn't fight it this time. Then I'll train you when you're ready, teach you everything, the medicine, the ethics, the weight of the responsibility. A young nurse approached hesitantly. Emily Bradford, 24 years old, Dr. Harlow's niece trying to build her own reputation separate from his. Colonel Kane, I start your tactical training program next week. I'm scared I'm not brave enough, not strong enough. Alexandra stood composed herself. I've been scared every single day for 15 years. In combat zones, in hiding, teaching now. The fear doesn't disappear. You just learn to function despite it. She met Emily's eyes directly. Courage isn't feeling fearless. It's feeling the fear and showing up anyway. That's all it is. Just showing up. Emily left looking inspired. That night, Alexandra was alone in the Tactical Emergency Medicine Training Center, the room where she taught, where she'd begun building her legacy. She pulled out her journal, opened to a blank page, wrote 4 names in careful script: Captain David Rodriguez, Sergeant Luis Martinez, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Corporal James Jackson. Below them she wrote, Justice served. The network that killed you is destroyed. Your sacrifices are honored. You can rest now. She closed the journal. For the first time in 15 years, she felt genuine peace. Not the temporary quiet of successful hiding, the deep, resonant satisfaction of completion. Her phone vibrated. Text message. Unknown number. Her muscles tensed reflexively. Another threat. She opened it. A photograph appeared. Young soldier in combat medic training, early 20s. Applying a tourniquet using a technique Alexandra had developed. The specific modification she'd taught just 2 weeks ago. Text below the image. Your student saved my life today in Kandahar. Used your protocol. Worked perfectly. Thank you, Colonel. Sergeant Miller, 3rd Infantry Division. Alexandra stared at the photograph for a long moment. This was legacy. Not medals locked in boxes. Not her name on legislation. This. Knowledge transferred. Skills passed down. Lives saved by people she'd trained. A chain of protection extending beyond her individual capability. She saved the photo to a new folder, labeled it Legacy. This would be the first of many she suspected. She turned off the lights, locked the training center, and walked to her car. New apartment waiting, larger than the old studio, with space for photographs displayed instead of hidden, space for memories celebrated instead of suppressed, space for a life lived openly. The invisible nurse had become visible. And in that visibility, she discovered something she thought she'd lost forever in the desert of Kandahar province 15 years ago. Purpose, not just survival, not just existence. Purpose. To build, to teach, to create a legacy of protection and healing that would outlast her physical presence. To ensure that her fallen teammates' deaths meant something beyond tragedy. To prove that from catastrophic loss, something valuable could still be built. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. She drove home through Los Angeles traffic past millions of lights representing millions of lives. Some of those lives would face emergencies, trauma, violence, medical crises, and when they did, they'd be treated by professionals who'd been trained by Colonel Alexandra Kane, who'd learned not just the technical skills of emergency medicine, but the ethical foundation, the moral courage, the understanding that healing sometimes requires the strength to protect. That was her legacy, and it would endure long after she was gone. The invisible woman had finally found her voice, and the world was listening.